Here with the Washington Examiner's senior investigative reporter Richard Pollock, we're talking about the growing popularity of those ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft. We actually took a ride in Uber a couple weeks ago.
Absolutely.
And you dug into this topic and found something interesting about the companies, the taxi groups that are launching this war against these ride-sharing companies. What did you find?
Well, I was sort of a recipient of the war. I was getting pinged almost every month by this group called the Taxi Cab Limo and Paratransit Association. I said, what is that organization? And this is really very classic for an investigative reporter. You need to sort of follow your nose about what's going on. So I began to look into it, and I discovered when I spoke to them that they don't represent taxi cab drivers, but owners of taxi cab fleets and limo fleets. And to my shock, the president of the organization is not a blue-collar taxi cab driver who earns $32,000 a year, which is about the average, but he's earning $324,000 a year in annual compensation.
That's a red flag. I mean, considering that they, I guess, purport to be representing these cab drivers who are, we're assuming they're losing their livelihood because of these new services. Is that a red flag? Should that be a red flag to consumers who are watching this war play out in the media?
That was my first red flag. The second was I learned that the president is a guy named Robbie Worth in Springfield, Virginia, owns Diamond Cab and Diamond Transport. And it turns out that since 1984, which is over 30 years, he has never had his company accredited by the Better Business Bureau. And they're trying to say, well, we're very consumer-oriented. Uber and Lyft and Sidecar are not oriented in terms of the consumer. But here's a guy who has refused to cooperate with the BBB over 30 years, which is really quite incredible and goes totally contrary to the message, I think, of what they're trying to tell.
Right, because they're trying to make Uber and Lyft out to be these unregulated, unsafe entities, and meanwhile, they're not playing their own game. They're not walking the walk, so to speak.
What's really interesting is that a large number of Uber drivers are actually taxi cab drivers on the side, and in fact, we took a drive with an Uber driver, and he was a limo driver, and it was a beautiful town car, and it really is an interesting technology and innovation to try to really connect passengers and drivers in a way in which you save money. It's much more convenient, and here is this sort of entrenched old line industry, rather than trying to cooperate with it, is fighting it. And they've had a war chest that they've amassed to try to really defeat Uber in many, many different states, including Virginia, even here in the District of Columbia.
I guess one of the takeaways is, as you watch these wars of words play out, you got to take everything with a grain of salt.
Well, I think that what is really interesting is that this group has been throwing stones at Uber and Lyft and Sidecar, all of these ride-sharing companies. And in fact, you shouldn't be in a glass house if you do that. And they are a little bit in a glass house. They really have some serious problems, particularly about the consumer orientation and even their connection with, I think, the consumer.
Senior investigative reporter Richard Pollock giving us a look inside this fight with ride-share companies like Uber and Lyft. I'm Ed Sykes.